Afternoon, everybody. As I say, I've been in the industry for about 30 years and I've worked at Wavemaker for about 15 of those. And I want to start today by asking you a question, actually getting you to think about something. Is content decay a silent threat to website performance? And why do I think that? Why am I standing here before you today talking about this? Well, over the past sort of decade or so, I've worked with brands from financial services, from healthcare, from gaming and travel. And all have invested significant amounts of time and money in their website content strategies. And most of them, have seen some form of performance impact by content decay. And this is an ever-growing problem that we seem to have now in this sort of dynamic AI search world. And this isn't just an SEO problem. This is a business problem. If you think about it, as your content is decaying, you're losing visitors to your website and you're losing sales. But it also damages your brand. It damages your brand when a user can't find your content or it's untrustworthy information that they're finding. And it also wastes the time. It wastes the time and the money that you spent in the first place trying to develop this content. And critically for me, in today's world, it feeds another growing problem. The biases and inaccuracies that we're seeing in large language models that are using web content to be trained and learn from. So over the next 15 minutes, hopefully, we're going to go on a journey. We're going to first look at the disease, trying to find out what that content decay is. Secondly, we're going to try to look at the diagnosis, kind of what tools and frameworks and processes we can put in place to find these issues. And finally, the cure. How can we put frameworks in place to make sure that your content stays high-performing going into the future? But what are we actually talking about? What is content decay? Well, first of all, it is not a Google penalty. Content decay is this natural process, if you like, that erosion of a web page's performance and relevancy and accuracy over time. I think that's key for me because we need to start changing our mentality and thinking more of managing a website almost like a living, breathing entity that you need to be fit and healthy and need to be maintained. And there are kind of 4 ways that I see content decay devaluing your website. And the first one is that algorithmic devaluation. Search engines, by their very nature, they reward fresh, relevant content. So systematically, they're going to devalue most of that old content. And as their content becomes less relevant to the sort of needs of the user, you're going to see drops in rankings, which is ultimately going to see a drop in traffic and click-through. But also, if you think about it, as the content gets older, it's not going to meet the standards that we need today for a modern content strategy. So simple things around expertise, authority, and trust. And some examples, some very quick examples. Outdated content. That content that was once relevant to a specific point in time, so travel trends or financial trends. And thin content, if you created doorway pages, and for me, a bugbear of mine is if you look at some probably more local press and news websites, it's such dreadful thin content. And finally, creating content without looking at the persona or the audience or the user first. And this is not something new. Google's been talking about this for decades. Create content for the user first, not for the search engines. And the SEO impact is just the beginning. The real damage comes with the outdated content. What does it do to your brand? When a user lands on your page and it finds untrustworthy or outdated content or information, what do you think? What do you think they're going to think? Do you think they're reliable? Do you think you can be trusted? And if you can't be trusted, they're simply going to bounce and go to a competitor. And this brings me to another new critical kind of responsibility. Large language models from the likes of ChatGPT and OpenAI, they're using our web content to learn and to be trained. So some of the latest language models, yes, we know they've got sort of self-reasoning and logic within them, but when our content becomes out of date or just plain wrong, they amplify these biases and inaccuracies. So fighting content decay isn't just about protecting our brand, it's also about contributing to a more healthy information ecosystem in the future. So the decay process is going to be inevitable. It's not a question of if it's going to happen, it's more likely when it's going to happen. So how do we kind of spot this sickness early? And the tool for this is to stop being reactive and stop panicking. And it's to simply use the content audit. A keep, kill, merge, refresh process. Now, this is not a scary, one-off every 5 years, huge piece of work. This is a regular health check for your content. So going through some simple processes, collecting all those URLs, looking at the performance data, categorizing the content, that's going to allow you to define some clear actions and solve some issues. And you do this with the tools you're probably already using every day. You can use the tools like Deep Crawl, and you're going into tools like analytics, like Google Analytics and Search Console. Gather data over a period of time. Map every single page that you can find on your website, both indexed and non-indexed. This information, if you start looking at it, this data is going to point you to where your sickest pages are. Ultimately, you need to build out this huge data set to start with to allow you to start asking questions of that data. And the next stage is then, okay, you've got this huge list of URLs, this huge map of every single page on your website. You now need to create some filters and categories to start cutting that data to allow you to analyze it better. So start by looking at the page type and create simple categories. Is it a home page, a blog page? Is it a category page? And the next thing, once you can map that content, is to look at the intent. So again, for me, this is quite key. So trying to intend the primary intent of every single page. This could mean in your future content strategy, pivoting a little, especially if you wanted to bring more informational or inspirational content into your process. And then the final stage is to map it around the page topic. Now, there may be some of you that manage international websites, so if you're matching content to a specific topic, this could help you to scale that content across international markets, but it could also help you if you're looking to amplify that content into things like social media. Okay, so we've now got this big spreadsheet, or this big data warehouse, fully categorized with every single thing about all the performance aspects around your website. The next thing you need to do is to start asking questions of that data. And these are simple questions, like, are you seeing kind of sustained traffic drops over time? Is there little or no search interest anymore around the topics that content was originally optimized for? Are you seeing declining on-page metrics and UX metrics? And are you seeing drops in rankings as well? And there might be some of you out there that manage huge websites, tens if not hundreds of thousands of pages. So you can create these logic rules, if you like, again, to programmatically decide which content to keep, to kill, to merge, or to refresh. However, that data does only tell you so much about the information that we've got. You do need to apply this human layer. And this human layer would be on your most important pages. Open it, read it, look at the content. Is it still relevant? But also, there may be content that looks like it's underperforming, but it has genuine reasons. It could be corporate PR. It could be customer service pages. It could be paid media partnerships or PPC landing pages. These were never intent to drive high traffic to your site. Okay, so now we've done all this data analysis, we've got all this information, we've put all this together. We've now got a clear blueprint, an action plan that we can make for your content. We can understand what content we want to keep and do nothing with, what content we want to kill and we want to redirect to a relevant page, what content we want to merge if it's got similar or duplicate pages, and finally, what content we want to refresh and bring into our future content strategies. Okay, it's Brighton SEO, October 2025. I think I've done really well. I think I've only mentioned AI maybe a handful of times so far, so I think I've done well with that. But in all seriousness, one thing that we do need to be cognizant of is the change in search landscape. We've seen over the last 18 months things like the rise in AI overviews and the rise in Google's AI mode. And what we need to do is understand how the search landscape is changing for the terms that we're trying to optimize our content for. And that's for two critical reasons. If you're seeing a decline in the performance of your content, it might not be down to the content itself. It might be down to the fundamental changes we're seeing in the search landscape. And secondly, if you are seeing this decline because of this, you need to bring that thinking into your content strategy in the future so you can look at how you can optimize to be in AI overviews and into large language models by looking at things like Google's fan-out query technique and chunking those content down into paragraphs. Okay, so we've diagnosed the disease, we kind of put those corrective measures in place, we've formed our content plan. But what is the long-term cure? How do we stop this from happening again in the future? Well, it needs a fundamental shift in mindset. You need to stop thinking of content as a project that simply ends in publish. You need to pivot and you need to focus on the entire life cycle of that content. Focusing on the maintain phase is critical, and this is how we're going to fight content decay. And we also need to recognize that content does have a shelf life, so when it does get to that point when you want to retire the content, make sure you do it properly, retire it, and send it to the right place. And we all know across different organizations that there's a lot of people involved in website content. So make sure you put in place the right rules. Make sure you put in place governance, committees. Make sure you use tools like Asana, project management tools. Set up clear races so you know who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed about every decision that's been made about the content on your website. Okay, so let's stop and think again. What have we done so far with this keep, kill, merge, refresh process? Well, we've got a clean website. We've removed old, outdated, redundant content. We've removed site bloat. We've got a fully mapped and categorized by every single page and every single URL on the website. And you've now got the foundations of your future content strategy and your content investments. But what you also have with this fully mapped website, it allows you the ability to map to your most valuable content. So looking at your gold, your silver, and your bronze content. This is going to allow that extra layer to prioritize your content investments going forward. And here's a simple checklist. If you're looking at your gold content, this is probably your highest performing content. It's probably in the top 5 of all your rankings. You're probably looking at highest search volume terms you're trying to optimize for. This is maybe the top 10, 15% of all the traffic, if not more, to your site. You should be looking to review this in your content plan at least every 3 months. You should be tracking and monitoring the performance of this almost weekly, if not more. And when you look to your silver and bronze, this is maybe where you do this less frequency. This may be every 12 months or every 18 months, maybe looking at things like annual finance or travel trends. Maybe not with the scrutiny or the frequency we had with the gold content, but again, you still need to look at this as part of this maintain phase. And if you are looking at this content refresh process or creating new content, you do need to bring in these modern content principles. So again, bringing in things like expertise, authority, and trust, and making sure that you bring in and understand the needs of being met of the consumer in the content and matching the intent and the page design and the UX. And also making sure that you do consider large language models and things like AI overviews. So when you're structuring and refreshing the content, understanding Google's fan-out query techniques and chunking of content. But don't be afraid, there are tools to help you with this. There are a number of tools that will allow you to analyze the content, benchmark and baseline against your competitors. And here's a few. There are Keyword Insights and ClearScope are 2 of the tools that we use at WPP. Or you can even create your kind of own AI agent here that we've done by within our WPP Open AI toolset. Okay, so we've looked at the problem, we've diagnosed it, and we've put in some corrective measures in terms of the cure. So I want to try to wrap this up a little with 4 things that I'd like you to remember. And first and most importantly, this requires a proactive approach. Content decay is natural. It's not if, but when it's going to happen. Ignoring it is your choice. You need to move from this publish and forget mindset to a publish and manage. And secondly, again, this is bigger than just SEO. Remember, the stakes are a lot higher than just your rankings. You're the protector of your brand's reputation and users' trust. And you're the integrity of the future of AI learning on the web. So schedule your first content audit. Apply the keep, kill, merge, refresh process. Because ultimately what we're talking about here, this is where search is going. The future of search belongs to those who are consistently providing us with helpful, trustworthy, relevant content. Fighting content decay is how you're going to stay in that group. So when I started this presentation, I asked you a question, which was, is content decay a silent threat to website performance? In my view and from my experience, it absolutely is a threat to website performance. I want to leave you with a final thought. I want to set you a challenge. You now have the tools in the content audit. So when you're back at your desks on Monday, find those pages that used to be brilliant and they're not anymore. and start that process. That's how we'll begin fighting content decay. Thank you.
Demand sphere. Limitless visual